Hey everybody, it's me. It's time for our amendment class. Tonight we're going to do on the First Amendment, and I'm going to do it in kind of a weird order. I'm not going to do the religious part of it first. We're going to do everything else first because that's going to be easy to get rid of. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the amendment and how your government, be it state, local, or federal, has pretty much taken each one of our amendments and destroyed them. So we all know the First Amendment covers religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, like I said, I'm going to skip over the religious part of it. That's going to be the part that we do last. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is freedom of speech. And although there's been multiple rulings on the freedom of speech and all this other stuff, we all know through the media, through government, through certain terminology that the government is basically trying to destroy freedom of speech. Whether it be calling it politically correct or not politically correct to say something, labeling some stuff hate speech, it doesn't really matter because the government and the people that you're going against can just pick and choose. There's a lot of speech out there that I don't agree with, but everyone still has a right to say it. Now, obviously, if something you say physically harms somebody, not mentally harms somebody, like screaming fire in a crowded movie theater and people getting trampled, then yeah, there's that. You know, that's not free to do. But for me to say, whatever I want in whatever way I want to say it, I should not be dealing with repercussions for that. And then we all know that, like during the Bundy Ranch thing, they had a free speech area, so you were only allowed to speak openly in these little corrals, and obviously you weren't anywhere near the press when you were in those corrals, so your opinion didn't matter. Freedom of press. So I don't remember what founder it was, but one of the founders basically said that the reason that the press has their freedom is because they're supposed to be the go-between between government and the people. So the press was supposed to figure out what the government was trying to do, report it to the people, in an honest manner, and we all know they don't do that. Well, some of us know they don't do that. There's still people out there that think that, they're not lying to you. But easiest way to figure this out is, and the easiest way to look into it, is you can Google the Obama administration's correlation to the mainstream media. Brothers, sisters, cousins, all these people in the Obama administration were related to or married to people in the top media outlets. And some people might not like me bringing up Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan in the 80s took away a bunch of government regulations that actually kept the media networks, newspapers, all that stuff from monopolizing. So basically what he did is he opened the door for, in his deregulation of certain things, what ended up happening was he opened the door for the larger media moguls to start buying up some of the smaller ones. Basically monopolizing our media outlet, and so basically what we have now is we have like 5 ruling members of media, and that basically covers the whole country. Just 5 corporations is basically what we have to deal with. And those 5 corporations are heavily involved in government, whether it be through relationships, funding, whatever. So our media outlets are not a free press anymore. They're a government propaganda machine, bought and paid for. And stuff that you can search. I said that if I did these videos, I would put links and stuff like that. I'm not going to put links. So we have that. So the freedom of press is basically destroyed. The right of the people to peacefully assemble. You don't have that right anymore, because for you to peacefully assemble, you have to petition the government to get a permit. You have to explain to them what you're doing, and the government can either grant or deny the permit. And even if they do grant or deny the permit, they are now charging you a fee to get that permit. So that is no longer a right, because a right means you can go wherever you want, stand there, and actually protest. You can't do that. You need to pull a permit. So that one's gone. Okay. And then petition your government for a redress of grievances. So even if you did petition the government for a redress of grievances, would they listen? No. Why aren't they going to listen? Why isn't anything going to be done? Because you don't have a free press, you have a government propaganda machine. So even if they did listen to you, if they wanted you destroyed, they could definitely do that through the media. If you don't feel they listened to and you wanted to petition for the right to protest, because you actually just talked to the government, they're not going to grant your protest. You're not going to get your permit. And this country is full of stupid people. They're just going to vote these idiots back in again. So there's no threat of them actually losing their job. So no, you don't have that one either. And now we're going to go to the one that's going to completely ruin everybody's day. Because I'm going to teach you all that the separation between church and state doesn't mean what you were taught it meant. So basically, everybody knows that we have a separation of church and state. And the government is not basically allowed to pass laws and stuff like that to take away your freedom to practice the religion any way that you want. But we all know that they do. The gay marriage thing is one, because, obviously they're saying that this Catholic baker, even though his religion is totally against homosexuality, doesn't want to bake a cake, but the guy can go right down the street and get another baker to do it. This guy gets in trouble. So government is trying to screw religion all the time. But people think that the reason we have separation between church and state is so people can be free to practice the religion any way they seem fit. So here I am, I'm going to ruin your lives. That's not why we have separation between church and state. We have a separation between church and state because when the state and the church get together, there is always tyranny. Anytime the church got support from the ruling class and they worked together, there was always bad things happened. You can look that up any way you want. It's never good. Never a good thing. Sorry, my mouth's kind of dry. That's why we have a separation of church and state. It has nothing to do with that. So basically, once you separate the church and the state cannot grant the church powers. So they basically can't rule over other people. In Massachusetts, you actually had religious groups that were being taxed. In Pennsylvania, at one point in time, you couldn't even vote unless you were Catholic. So you had all these state laws that were, being passed. But, yeah. So I know it seems pretty simple and everything, but just so you guys know, I know a lot of people also think that, our founding fathers have a lot of, all these like religious undertones in the way they wrote the Constitution. But to be honest with you, a lot of our founding fathers were not actually that religious. They actually didn't. They basically looked at religion kind of like the way that I do. I feel that religion has cost more death and hardship than government has over the centuries. So You can hate me for that too. But I actually have three little snippets from three separate founding fathers on this subject to help you along with that. So the first one's from Benjamin Franklin. And it states, if we look back into the history for the character of the present sects in Christianity, we shall find few that have not, in their turns, been persecutors and complainers of persecution. The primitive Christians thought persecution extremely wrong in the pagans, but practiced it on one another. The Protestants, or the Church of England, blamed persecution in the Roman Church, but practiced it upon the Puritans. These found it wrong in the bishops, but fell into the same practice themselves, both here in England and in New England. That was from a letter Benjamin Franklin wrote to the London Packet on June 3rd, 1772. So he doesn't talk about religion in a very big light. And then basically the father of our Constitution, James Madison, one of the most important documents he wrote on this topic is called The Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments. That was written in 1785. During almost 15 centuries has the legal establishment of Christianity been on trial. What have been its fruits? More or less, in all places, pride and indulgence in the clergy, ignorance and servility in the laity, in both superstition, bigotry, and persecution. What influence, in fact, have elastical establishments had on society? In some instances, they have been seen to erect a spiritual tyranny on the ruins of the civil authority. In many instances, they have been seen upholding the thrones of political tyranny. In no instance have they been the guardians of the liberty of the people. And then just 2 years later, John Adams, he wrote, it will never be pretended that any persons employed in the service in that service had any interviews with the gods, or were in any degree under the influence of heaven, any more than those at work upon ships or houses, or laboring in merchandise or agriculture. It will forever be acknowledged that these governments were contrived merely by the use of reason and senses. 13 governments, referring to the 13 colonies, thus founded on natural authority of the people alone. The people alone, not government, not religion, the people alone, without a pretense of miracle or mystery, which are destined to spread over the northern part of the whole quarter of the globe, are a great point gained in favor of the rights of mankind. So basically, by saying that there's no religion involved here, there's no miracles, there's no mystery involved in any of this, mankind gained in favor of the rights. So our rights, you take religion and all that stuff out of there, you know, we're going to do we're going to do better off with all of that stuff. And if you want to look that up, that's from the works of John Adams, second president of the United States, volume number 4. That was written in 1851. So where does that leave us? Okay, so basically, if you go by the common argument of why we have separation of church and state and why we have religious freedom and all that stuff, which is basically what everybody does, you can, there's doing it that way, there's way too much gray area. which is why you have Supreme Court rulings in completely different directions. So in one state, there's a Supreme Court ruling basically saying that the statue of the Ten Commandments that were at the top of the stairs with nothing else around them was unconstitutional and needed to be removed from that state house. But in another state where the Ten Commandments were out on the front lawn, surrounded by other statues with other things on them, the Supreme Court basically said it was constitutional even though it was on the state house lawn because it had other statues around it. Way too much gray area. You take my argument and you say that you have a separation of church and state because the state can't do anything with the church and the church can't do anything with the state, then the Supreme Court's not allowed to rule on anything that has to do with religion. Supreme Court's not allowed to rule on Ten Commandment stuff. Supreme Court's not allowed to rule on gay marriage. All of that stuff is left up to the states. It's the state's job to deal with that thing. The federal government's not allowed to rule on any of it. And then you have this other thing where, people say, well, the Supreme Court ruled. Well, it's just a ruling. I'm sorry. Basically, the Supreme Court rules on whether or not something is constitutional or not. And again, if you go by the original argument of all of this stuff, when it comes to religion and everything, there's too much of a gray area. The Supreme Court can rule in any direction it wanted to. If you go by my separation between the church and the state, there's only one way the Supreme Court or government can rule on anything of any religious nature whatsoever. And that is they can't rule on it. Because they've been separated and restricted by the Constitution to rule on anything to do with religion, which is what the Constitution was originally designed. The Constitution was designed by leaders of the states to restrict the federal government. So again, they've manipulated the meaning of the separation of church and state and freedom of religion to mean one thing so that the government can rule on it. And that's not right. The government is not allowed to rule on anything religious. It's a restriction. Just like everything else in the first 10 amendments is a restriction, the separation of church and state and the freedom of religion is a restriction. And the Supreme Court doesn't write laws. They rule on constitutionality. So just because the Supreme Court says that gay marriage is legal in every state, not that I want to pick on gay marriage because I don't really care if they get married or not. What I care about is the constitutionality of these rulings and the way our government is going. They're not allowed to rule on that. They are not allowed to tell an individual how he can practice his religion. It's that simple. So again, to my whole meaning behind all of this stuff is now you have the government totally manipulating an amendment to suit its needs so it can rule on something it was originally restricted from ruling on. So that's what I got. I'll move this over to Facebook, and let's have a conversation in the comments section. All right? Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.